but no mention about the accuser's family. Now that 2 other allegations have come forward, do you think that they'll be heard by the Judicial Committee? Or how do you think that this will play out ultimately? What will it take for an actual process to start and delay this official nomination when it comes to these allegations?
And I guess, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so, I think there's a lot that could happen. There's many theories circulating about what will happen, but then there's also what's likely to happen. So we are currently in the process of waiting to hear the testimony tomorrow from Dr. Ford, which I think will be telling. Judge Kavanaugh will give his response to that. They've scheduled, at least procedurally, a possible vote to happen on Friday that may get extended into next week, but may get extended further. Really, from a strategy standpoint, the smartest thing that the White House could probably do right now, if they want to avoid a potential political disaster, would likely be to pull the nomination for Judge Kavanaugh and appoint someone with similar judicial leanings should they so desire. As it stands right now, this has the effect of possibly costing a lot of swing state Republicans their possible seat with an election just over a month away at this point. So the timing, at least from my standpoint, couldn't be any worse for congressional Republicans across the board.
Right.
Agreed.
I agree as well.
So in terms of the questioning itself, what type of questions do you think they'll be throwing out?
Oh, tomorrow,
Yes.
Any sort of person with a prosecutorial background is going to really focus on the specifics of the incidents alleged. So if the incident is the party incident that was referred to in the summer of 1980 or whatever year it was, they'll focus on what was the date that day. You don't remember what you ate for breakfast that day. You don't remember XYZ from that day. It's true that you understand that everybody else is denied being there, and you never reported it before. These are routine questions that they're going to ask, and the presumption there is because you didn't disclose it at the time, that means it's not true. Because you don't remember every incident or every other event from that day, you won't remember properly this particular incident. Because you didn't take any action before and only decided to wait until this moment, it's politically motivated. These are all the typical questions that are likely to be asked. I can't imagine that there's going to be anything else. They're not going to delve, I don't think, too deeply into her own past, only because there's not any sort of benefit that they'd be able to receive from it. Their real goal is to cast doubt on the veracity of her claims. And it's going to be up to her to just testify and speak about the incident and speak honestly and openly. And, the interesting part is, how is this going to ultimately affect swing state Republicans right now? If you're a Senator Collins or a Senator Murkowski who aren't up for election this year but will be in a couple of years, how will this affect you as a female Republican senator, potentially during a hearing that's being used entirely insensitive to victims of sexual abuse? How will it affect senators in swing states like Nevada and Arizona? So, there's a lot that could happen. It'll be quite interesting to witness.
So, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So Rachel Mitchell is the prosecutor who's gonna be asking the questions. Is she only going to be questioning Dr. Ford, or will she have any questions for Kavanaugh as well?
My understanding is, from what I've read, and I could be wrong, but from what I've read, is that she will be questioning Dr. Ford, which a lot of people have criticized, because if you've retained counsel to question someone, it seems like an inquisition.
Right.
Rather
That's
than
what I'm
an
trying.
administrative hearing. Correct.
Right. Right, because, before, even though when it's just the senators and they're back and forth, they can give the illusion that they're fact-finding with the questions that they're trying to get, and they are trying to get to whatever their agenda is and prove their point. But when you go out and get I just think it's a bad look either way, that they all of a sudden can't And actually, the fact that they're doing this, that they're going outside and bringing in an attorney, does speak to the other question that you asked, Chief, about the Me Too movement and movements like that are having an influence on the processes that people are going through, that the Senate is going through at this point, because all of a sudden they're aware that they're a body on the Republican side of all white males.
Right, exactly.
And they're aware of what that's going to look like as they're questioning a woman. You know, I've never heard white folks talk about being white so much in my life. At this point, I've never heard white folks refer to themselves as white. and they're doing it all over. They're doing it all over the place here. And now all of a sudden they recognize it. And I don't think that happens without, for those who may be listening who think that, you know, these types of movements don't matter, or your involvement in grassroots type situations and things don't matter. This is a prime example of when you see, it may not be, no one may ever say that that's why it's being done, but those are the kind of things that people do, right or wrong. They may be making it's a weird move, I think, because it does end up putting her on the stand, almost like a witness stand, where she's just trying to tell her story. And they're just going to be pelting her with these questions, and it gives a whole new generation an opportunity. Those who did not see what went down with Anita Hill, it gives them a whole new generation now will be able to see that kind of hearing. Although, you know, again, it's going to be hard for me to remove. You know, growing up under a civil rights preacher, it's going to be hard for me to remove the fact that, you know, Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas was black on black, and here you've got Kavanaugh and Ford and whoever else comes on. You know, that the race issue somehow will be at play in some folks' heads. But those movements, I think the Me Too movement has made a difference, even though I really don't agree with them bringing someone on. It's almost like they're not fact-finding. They're looking for holes in the story, which obviously, you know, I can't tell you what I ate for breakfast this morning, let alone, you know, what happened years ago.
Exactly. There you go.
And I hope people, I mean, do you think that anyone will be swayed one way or the other? Because I think the people who are entrenched and who are pro-Kavanaugh are going to be pro-Kavanaugh. I mean, what kind of things could happen that would make a difference?
There's really a handful of senators that are going to make this call. I mean, like you said, there are partisan stretches here where there might not be any sort of impact. But when you have Democrats and Republicans, both of them, you know, you have some vulnerable red state Democrats and you have some vulnerable Republicans in swing states. Both of them could be swayed. I mean, you have someone like Senator Collins, who suggested today that she was uncomfortable with the narrative this is taken, and that these other accusers ought to be heard before any vote is taken. That's a sign that she's amenable to listening. You have other senators, Jeff Flake and Bob Corker, both Republicans, who will not be running for election again. They may break, and Flake in particular has already broken with the president a number of times. So, you know, all in all, it will make for interesting theater, if nothing else. And Dr. Ford did release her statement earlier today, part of her testimony for what she's going to be saying tomorrow. Encourage everybody to read it or just simply watch the testimony, but it's compelling to say the least.
So, yeah, that should be interesting.
Well, let me ask you this: do you think that well, let me change that question. Why is there such disdain for this woman? I hear everybody talking about we want a fair process. We want this to be transparent. But it definitely, at least when you listen to the president and Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell and all these other guys, that they really think this lady is full of crap. And
you know, I don't actually know that that's the case. I think that they've kind of boxed themselves in politically, and it would be tough to admit that you put up a potential rapist for the United States Supreme Court. they're simply so partisan. Washington's become so partisan that they're unwilling to change the story. One of the other interesting points is the contrast that exists, and it's kind of the unspoken reality that people have realized at this point. The treatment that Dr. Ford is receiving right now is far superior to the treatment that Anita Hill received in the 90s. I don't even think that's up for debate really amongst anybody. Anita Hill was ripped to shreds, destroyed, her reputation entirely tattered.
Absolutely.
And so, do we know whether that's a product of us living currently in a Me Too movement? We're not sure. Does the race of the accused or the perpetrator have something to do with it? Possibly. But does the race of the victim that's involved play a role in this? And that's really the issue, is that it's twofold. It goes back to the same disparity that existed when we were discussing the treatment between Cosby and Kavanaugh. Look at the disparity between Dr. Ford, who everybody, by and large, is saying, give her the opportunity to speak. Let's hear what she has to say. Not really calling her a liar, attempting to suggest that her memory might just be off, at least even those opposed to her, versus others who are advocating passionately for her and saying, we need to take a stand, versus the treatment that Anita Hill received when she was just left out to dry, received no cover, and really at this point served as a model for the reasons not to come forward when you're the victim of a crime of this nature.
So let me ask you this. So how does it look if, let's just say tomorrow, the sides, which I fully expect, both sides are still going to be dug into their respective positions. So what do we do with these other two victims that are hanging out there, and what there may even be more out there? But what do we do as far as that look, particularly if they've decided, well, we've heard enough, we're moving on for our confirmation hearing? How does that impact this whole process? How do you think that impacts the elections?
No, it plays a tremendous role. At the end of the day, these types of hearings are what give people the courage to be able to come forward and speak. If Judge Kavanaugh is confirmed after hearing this type of incident, these types of allegations that have occurred, there is going to be very little trust in the judiciary system as a whole, and I would imagine it would significantly deter victims from coming forward in these types of incidents moving forward.
Wow, that's a shame, and I agree with both of you gentlemen. I think it's very important that if someone brings an allegation about your conduct, particularly if it's a criminal allegation, you absolutely need to get to the bottom of it. You shouldn't just have a person come forward and say, Thinbad did this horrible thing to me, and then that's it for him. I think there absolutely has to be a process to vet that information and to make sure that they get as much information, credible information as possible, so that reasonable conclusions can be drawn on the allegations and whether or not it may or may not have occurred. And I think that's the one thing that we're probably not going to get in this process. There's definitely not a willingness to let the FBI look into these things. They certainly have the resources to do that. I think that there are a lot of other things they could do to at least say, if they're going to move forward with this guy, to say, okay, the FBI looked into it. This is what they said. We looked into it. This is what our conclusions were. And based on that, either we're moving forward or we're not. But there just seem to be so many big pieces of this whole thing missing that I think you're right. It's going to really create some issues down the line.
That's right.
On either side, you're right.
Absolutely.
You're right. And, it just, I'm in the back of my mind, when you speak of the FBI, there's always 57,000 things going on at once. So while this is going on, it's not lost on me that you got this whole Rothstein thing in the back too. Like, what's going on with that while this is going on? When you talk about the FBI and what they're able to do, and because if something happens to him, then we got to turn right, and as soon as this is over, we got to keep our eyes on that. To make sure that Mueller stays in place, and if he gets this Supreme Court nomination and this goes through without a hitch, Um,